Chapter 1 The Recall. Luca Moretti had not slept properly in 9 years, not since the night they carried him out of the Vatican on a stretcher, screaming that the walls were bleeding Latin. Tonight. The phone rang at exactly 02:13. He knew the time without looking. The digital clock on the microwave in his tiny Trastevere flat had frozen at that minute years ago and never moved again. The caller ID was blank, yet the ringtone was the old Swiss Guard march, the one they only played inside the walls. He let it ring 7 times. On the 8th, he answered. "Moretti," he said, voice rough from the last cigarette and the ones that would follow until dawn. A pause long enough to hear his own pulse. Then a voice he had prayed never to hear again. Monsignor Gregorio, the prefect of the secret archive, the man who had personally signed Luca's dishonorable discharge, the same man who, 9 years earlier, had whispered, "Some doors, once opened, do not close for the living." "Luca." Gregorio's voice cracked like old parchment. "They're all gone. 47 men in 6 months. Vanished. Mad, or worse, you're the only one who ever came back out alive." Another pause, wetter this time. "The bronze doors remember you. They will open for you. Come tonight, before the next name is written." The line went dead. The microwave clock blinked once and advanced to 02:14, as if time itself had been holding its breath. Luca stood in the dark kitchen for a long time, feeling the scar across his throat itch. The thin white line they told the newspapers was a suicide attempt. He had not tried to kill himself. Something had tried to wear his skin like a cassock and had been interrupted. He dressed the way a condemned man dresses, slowly, deliberately. The old uniform was still in the box under his bed, pressed and untouched, the white collar starched to a blade. He left the medals in their case. Tonight he would not need symbols of honor. Outside. Rome was drunk and asleep. He walked because taxis refused to cross the Tiber after midnight when the fare was headed to the Vatican. The night smelled of jasmine and river rot. Every church bell he passed was silent, as though the city itself had been gagged. At Porta Sant'Anna, the floodlights were off. The great bronze doors, cast in 1667, 30 tons of verdigris and judgment, stood ajar exactly the width of one man. No sentry, no camera light, only a single black ribbon tied to the handle, fluttering like a tongue. Luca stepped through. The doors closed behind him with the soft finality of a coffin lid. He waited for the clang, the echo that should have rolled down the Cortile del Belvedere. There was none. The sound had been swallowed the instant it left the metal, devoured by something that lived between the stones. Inside the walls, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. The scent hit him first, myrrh, candle smoke, and beneath it the copper sweetness of old blood baked into marble for centuries. He knew this smell. It was the smell of confessionals that had never been cleaned. His boots, civilian boots, made no sound on the cobblestones. He looked down and saw why. The stones were wet. Not with rain, with oil, lamp oil, the same consecrated chrism used to anoint popes and kings. It glistened black under the hidden moon, forming a perfect path that led deeper, toward the Palazzo del Governatorato. Halfway there, he stopped. Every external security camera, the ones that watched the border between the smallest country and the rest of the world, had been carefully draped in black cloth from the inside, not spray painted, not smashed, draped, as if someone had taken the time to blind them one by one, politely, the way you lower a corpse's eyelids. Luca reached for his old access card out of habit. The lanyard was still in his pocket, the plastic cracked, the photo faded. He had meant to throw it away years ago. He held it up to the sensor beside the side entrance. The reader glowed green, a soft chime, almost tender. The door unlocked. He stepped inside, and the door locked again behind him. The click was gentle, almost loving. The corridor was lit only by the red sanctuary lamps that never went out. They floated in their ruby glass like hearts removed from bodies and kept beating by sheer will of tradition. Luca's shadow stretched ahead of him, too long, too thin, as though the ceiling had grown taller in his absence. He passed the duty desk. The logbook lay open. The last entry, written in shaking red ink, was dated tonight, so 1:47. Name column, Captain Luca Moretti. Time in, so 2:13. Time out, blank. Remarks column, welcome home. Underneath, in different handwriting, someone had added a single Latin phrase in the margin. Redquad Davies, render what you owe. Luca felt the scar on his throat burn as if the words had been branded there. He kept walking. The barracks were next. He could already smell them. Sweat, gun oil, and the faint sweetness of the almond biscuits the Swiss guards baked on feast days. Only tonight the smell was wrong, too fresh, as if 47 men had just stepped out for a cigarette and would be back any second. He reached the threshold and stopped dead. Every bunk was made with military precision. Every pillow bore the indentation of a head that had lain there minutes ago. Steam still rose from a coffee cup on the windowsill, but the room was empty. On the central table lay a single Polaroid. Face down, Luca turned it over. It was him, taken from directly above, asleep in the top bunk that had once been his. The timestamp burned into the bottom corner, read 02:11, 2 minutes before the phone call that woke him in Trastevere. He was wearing the uniform he now had on. The scar on his throat was visible, and his eyes in the photograph were open, milk white, staring straight up into the lens with the patient hunger of something that had been waiting a very long time. Behind him, very softly, the bronze doors of the Vatican locked again from the inside. This time, the sound carried. It rolled down the empty corridors like a slow funeral bell, announcing that the night shift had officially begun. And somewhere deep beneath his feet, something older than any pope shifted in its sleep and smiled. Chapter 2, The Dormitory That Remembers. Luca crossed the threshold, and the temperature climbed back to blood warm, as if the room itself had been holding its breath for 9 years, and now exhaled in relief. 47 bunks, 23 on each side, aligned with the obsessive geometry only Swiss guards ever truly master. Every blanket was tucked with hospital corners sharp enough to slice bread. Every pillow bore the shallow, perfect bowl of a head that had rested there less than 5 minutes ago. The air was heavy with the living heat of bodies that were no longer present. He moved down the center aisle on instinct, the way a man walks through his childhood home after the funeral. His boots still made no sound. The oil from the courtyard had followed him in, leaving black prints that evaporated behind him like sins being erased. The wall clock above the crucifix read, Sonu.27, but the second hand was moving backwards, lazy and deliberate, as though time had decided to rehearse the night in reverse. Every radio on every bedside table was switched on, volume barely above a whisper. Pachelbel's canon in D drifted through the room. Only the notes were inverted, descending where they should ascend. A lullaby played inside a mirror. The melody crawled under Luca's skin and nested there, familiar and wrong at the same time. He stopped at bunk number 9, his old bunk, top level. The ladder still had the notch he had carved with a bayonet the week he turned 25. A tiny cross wrapped in a circle. The mark was fresh. The wood pale where the knife had bitten, as if it had been carved tonight. The mattress above him sagged, heavy with recent weight. He reached up and pressed 2 fingers into the dip, warm, body warm. A single drop of sweat rolled from the underside of the upper bunk and landed on the back of his hand. He looked at it stupidly, the way a man stares at the first spot of blood from a wound he doesn't yet feel. Then he saw the desk at the far end, the duty officer's desk, lit by one green banker's lamp that should have been off. An open personnel file lay beneath the cone of light, like a body on an autopsy table. Luca knew whose file it was before he reached it. The cover bore the golden keys and tiara, and beneath, stamped in red that had not yet dried, Moretti. Luca Alessandro Capitaine, démission forcée 2016, date de fin de service définitive, 19 novembre 2025, heure en cours tonight. He turned the page with fingers that felt borrowed. Page 1, his original enlistment photo, age 22, eyes bright with the idiot certainty that God in Switzerland would keep him safe. Page 2, medical report from the night he was carried out screaming. The Vatican doctors had written delirium tremens, possible demonic oppression, recommend laicization, and amnesia protocol. Page 3, a single line added in Gregorio's spittery hand. Subject retains memory. Dangerous. The final page was blank, except for a Polaroid clipped to the paper with a rusted holy medal. The photograph showed the dormitory exactly as it was right now, taken from the ceiling directly above bunk 9. Luca was in the lower bunk, asleep on his back, mouth slightly open. His right hand rested on his chest, fingers curled exactly the way they were curled at this very moment. The scar on his throat was livid, fresh, wet. His eyes were open, filmed with death, staring straight into the lens with the serene patience of something that had already waited 9 years for this second. The timestamp in the corner was 02:26:44. 44 seconds ago, Luca felt the room tilt, the way it does just before vomiting. He looked up. The ceiling was white, seamless, no camera, no vent, no possible vantage point. Yet the angle was perfect, intimate, the way a lover watches you sleep. He backed away from the desk. His heel struck something soft. A Swiss Guard dress uniform lay folded on the floor behind him. Pristine white gala tunic, black trousers with the red stripe, the Morion helmet nested on top like a sleeping raven. The name tape above the breast pocket read Capitano L. Moretti, the rank he had never achieved. The helmet plume was still wet with dew, as if it had just come off parade. Luca knelt, touched the fabric. It was warm, breathing. the way skin is warm when the body has only just left it. From somewhere deeper in the barracks came the soft creak of bed springs, one after another, the gentle rhythm of 47 men turning over in their sleep. But there were no men. He stood slowly. Every pillow now faced the aisle, as if invisible heads had rolled to watch him. The indentations were deeper, wetter, outlined in faint red where ears and cheeks had pressed. The radios grew a fraction louder. The backwards cannon was joined by a second layer, voices beneath the strings, children's voices, singing the Salve Regina in perfect Gregorian. Only every consonant was reversed, every vowel stretched into a moan. Luca took one step back. The floorboards beneath him sighed, the way old wood sighs when weight is finally removed. He turned and walked, not ran, because running would mean they had already won, toward the exit. The door was closed. It had been open when he entered. The handle was warm, pulsing faintly, the way a throat pulses under your thumb when you press too hard. He pulled, locked, behind him. 47 blankets began to slide from 47 bunks, slow as shedskins, pooling on the floor in perfect white rectangles. Luca pressed his forehead to the cool wood of the door and whispered the only prayer he still remembered from childhood. Ave Maria, gratia plena. The radios answered in his own voice, recorded years ago, the night they dragged him out. Dominus tecum, do not open your eyes. Luca, they are already inside. The backwards cannon reached its climax and stopped dead. In the sudden silence he heard breathing, soft, steady, synchronized, coming from every bunk at once. 47 breaths that were not his. Then a single blanket lifted, hovered, and settled neatly over an invisible body that was now sitting upright on the edge of bunk 9. His bunk, waiting. The green banker's lamp flickered once and went dark. Somewhere in the blackness, a camera shutter clicked. Luca did not need light to know another Polaroid was sliding out of an unseen throat, warm and wet, ready to record whatever came next. Ostia Chapter 3, The Breathing Archives. Luca never decided to leave the dormitory. The dormitory decided to release him. The door that had been locked a heartbeat earlier swung inward on silent hinges the instant the darkness became absolute. A corridor of cold air rolled out, carrying the scent of parchment, left too close to candle flame for too many centuries. The temperature dropped so sharply that the sweat on his neck crystallized into tiny needles of ice. He stepped through because standing still felt infinitely more dangerous than walking forward. The passage he entered was not on any map he had ever studied, yet his feet knew the way. The floor slanted downward in a spiral so gradual it felt like sinking through warm oil. Walls that should have been rough-hewn travertine were smooth as lung tissue, pale, faintly veined, and breathing. Each exhalation stirred the fine hairs on his forearms. Each inhalation drew the fabric of his shirt against his spine like a slow, possessive hand. He descended alone, yet he was not alone. Something walked 3 paces behind him, matching his stride exactly, never hurrying, never falling behind only when he tried to spin around. Whenever he turned, the corridor was empty except for the faint swirl of dust motes rearranging themselves into the outline of a Swiss Guard halberd, then dissolving again. At the 7th landing, he counted because counting was the last sane thing left to him. The air thickened into syrup. The walls widened into a vault whose ceiling vanished upward into absolute black. Rows of iron-bound shelves stretched away in perfect, endless perspective, each one bowed under the weight of centuries. The smell here was no longer merely the old paper. It was myrrh soaked into human skin, frankincense baked into bone marrow, and beneath both, the bright, mineral tang of fresh arterial blood. The shelves were breathing in slow, tidal rhythm. Every inhalation lifted a millimeter of dust from the spines. Every exhalation returned it, warmer, heavier, tasting of iron filings and sacramental wine gone to vinegar. Luca's torch, he had found it clipped to a dead man's belt in the dormitory. Batteries still full, revealed titles in languages that hurt to read. Liber excommunicatarum infans, nomina obliterata, acta nocturna custodum. The leather bindings were too soft, too supple as the inside of a cheek. Some volumes had no titles at all, only a raised brand in the shape of the papal tiara, the skin beneath it still pink, as though the mark had been made minutes ago. He tried to keep to the center aisle, but the floor itself conspired against him. Flagstones tilted imperceptibly, nudging his boots toward the shelves. When he resisted, the air condensed into invisible palms that pressed between his shoulder blades, gentle but irresistible, the way a priest guides a reluctant communicant to the rail. 20 meters in, the guiding pressure stopped. Directly ahead, on a lectern carved from a single block of black marble, lay an open ledger the size of an altar missal. Its pages were vellum so thin the lamplight glowed through them like flesh held to a candle. The book was breathing faster than the shelves, chest rising and falling as though it had just run a very long way to be here tonight. Luca approached because refusal had already been edited out of the evening. The left-hand page was headed, in rust-brown ink that flaked when stared at too long, nomina custodum nocturnorum qui non reversi sunt beneath, in column after column of exquisite clerical script. Marched the names of every Swiss guard who had ever pulled night shift inside the secret archive and never walked out again. The list began in 1506 with a certain Hans von Bern and continued without interruption to the present. Each name had been struck through once, neatly, lovingly, with a single diagonal stroke of crimson that looked wet even after 500 years. There were 2,147 names. Luca's eyes traveled down the columns with the dull inevitability of a man watching his own blood drain. He reached the bottom of the right-hand page and felt his breath caught so violently it hurt. A new line had been added. Moretti, Luca Alessandro Capitane Ingressus, 19th of November 2025, H. 0213. Agressus, the ink was still liquid, pooling at the edges of each letter like fresh blood in a shallow cut. The handwriting was unmistakable, his own hurried scrawl. The slight hook on the capital L he had never managed to cure, the way the T crossed too high when he was frightened. He reached out to touch the page and the vellum flinched, a living thing shrinking from contact. The crimson bead welled where his fingertip hovered and rolled sideways, forming a perfect tear that hung, trembling, refusing to fall. Behind him, the shelves exhaled in unison, a sigh of satisfaction. Luca backed away. His heel struck something that should not have been there, a small wooden step stool, the kind used by altar boys to reach high candelabra, It had not been there a second ago. He looked up, suspended from the ceiling on threads too fine to see. A circle of 47 Morian helmets rotated slowly, each one containing a single lit vigil candle. The flames did not flicker, they burned straight upward, white and steady, the way altar candles burn when a soul is departing. Wax dripped upward, defying gravity, forming stalactites of translucent red that lengthened with every heartbeat. One helmet bore a fresh dent directly above the left temple, the exact shape of the butt of a halberd. Luca remembered the dent. He had put it there himself 9 years ago, during the struggle that ended with him on a stretcher and 46 other men missing. The circle completed a rotation and stopped. Every candle leaned toward him at once, flames bowing like courtiers. From the open ledger rose a sound, the soft, papery rustle of a quill still writing. Luca looked down. The line beneath his name was filling itself in, letter by letter, in the same red, rediquad debes, rediquad debes, rediquad debes. The phrase repeated until it overflowed the margin and began crawling up the page toward his name like ivy. Luca turned to run. The aisle behind him had vanished, where the corridor should have been. Shelves now pressed together, spines touching, forming a solid wall of books that inhaled and exhaled in perfect synchrony. He was inside a lung made of forbidden knowledge, and the lung had decided to keep him. He spun back. The ledger had closed itself on its cover, embossed in gold that hurt to look at directly, were the words, Tum est, it is yours. The book lifted from the lectern, weightless, and drifted toward him the way a communion host drifts on the paten. It stopped an inch from his chest, hovering, waiting for him to accept or refuse the gift. Luca did neither. Instead, he reached past it, seized the nearest volume from the shelf, and flung it open. The pages were blank, every page blank. Then slowly, words began to appear, not written, but bleeding upward through the vellum. You are reading this with eyes that no longer belong to the daylight world. Close the book or become its next chapter. He slammed it shut. The ledger was still there, patient, inevitable, breathing his name, somewhere far above, or perhaps inside his own skull. The backwards canon began again, only now it was sung by a single child's voice, high and clear and utterly alone. Et in terra pax hominibus bonae voluntatis, peace on earth to men of goodwill. The final note hung, stretched, thinned, until it became the sound of a throat being cut very, very slowly. Luca took the ledger. It was warm as living skin and twice as heavy as guilt. The shelves parted before him, exhaling a corridor of dust and myrrh that tasted exactly like the inside of a confessional after a murderer has left. He walked, because walking was the only direction still permitted, and the breathing archives followed 3 paces behind, matching his stride exactly, waiting for the moment when his heart would forget which name it was supposed to beat for. Chapter 4. The Chapel That Weeps Living Tears. The ledger clung to Luca's chest like a second, heavier heart. He felt its pulse sync with his own, slow, deliberate, ancient. Every footstep downward drew the air thinner, colder, until his lungs burned with the taste of high-altitude grief. The spiral stair ended at a door no wider than a coffin stood upright, its oak blackened by centuries of candle smoke and something darker, a brass plate, Green with verdigris bore one word in relief: lacrymae, 1378, the year the chapel had been ordered bricked up by decree of Urban VI. The Pope who believed tears could be contagious. Luca had never seen this door before, yet his fingers found the rusted latch as if it were the handle of his childhood bedroom. He did not push. The door sighed open by itself, exhaling a breath that smelled of salt and iron and the inside of a mother's cheek after she has bitten it to keep from screaming. The threshold crossed him. The bricks of the sealed archway did not swing or shatter. They simply surrendered. One by one they peeled inward, soft as scabs, tumbling silently into the darkness beyond and vanishing before they struck anything solid. No dust rose, only a faint, wet sound, like lips parting after a long kiss. He stepped inside. The chapel was smaller than memory allowed, barely 12 paces across, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. Moonlight, impossible moonlight, filtered through a rose window that had been mortared shut 647 years ago. The light was the color of tears held too long against eyelids, pale, bruised violet. The floor was flooded, ankle deep, warm, and moving, not sloshing, gliding. A slow, tidal breathing of saline that lapped at his boots with the tenderness of tongues. The liquid stung where it touched skin, sharp, intimate, the exact salinity of human grief. He knelt and dipped 2 fingers. They came away filmed in clear mucus threaded with tiny red capillaries, as though the floor itself were weeping blood too fine to see. The walls wept with it. From every crevice, every carved seraph's eye, every crack in the frescoes of the Last Judgment, clear fluid seeped in steady, rhythmic pulses, drip, pause, drip, the rhythm of a dying heart refusing to stop. Lucas straightened. Reflected in the flooded marble he saw them. Hundreds of child-sized Swiss Guard uniforms floating just beneath the surface, pristine white gala tunics, crimson stripes bright as fresh wounds, Morian helmets no larger than christening bowls. They drifted in perfect formation, as though an invisible company of boys stood at attention under the water, heads bowed, hands clasped behind their backs. The fabric did not billow, it hung heavy, soaked through, yet unsinkable, buoyed by something lighter than air and darker than faith. Their faces were missing, only smooth, pale ovals where features should have been, like statues waiting for the sculptor's final mercy. Luca's torch beam trembled across the drowned parade. The light caught on a brass nameplate glinting at the breast of the nearest uniform, the one drifting directly beneath his boots. He knelt again, slowly, the way a man kneels before a grave. He dug himself. The water closed over his wrist with a soft, sucking kiss. His fingers closed on the sodden fabric and pulled. The uniform rose weightless, streaming tears that pattered back into the pool like warm rain. It was impossibly small, cut for a boy of 9 or 10. The tunic was embroidered with the finest gold thread he had ever seen. The papal keys so delicate they looked spun from spider silk. He turned the collar inside out, sewn there in his mother's careful cross-stitch, faded but unmistakable. Was the name tag she had made the week he became an altar boy at San Giovanni in Laterano, Luca Moretti, 1989. The year he had vanished from the sacristy for exactly 33 minutes and returned unable to speak for 3 days. The uniform was warm, fever warm, as though a child's body had only just stepped out of it. Luca felt the ledger against his ribs beat once, hard, like a fist demanding entrance. From the rose window above came a sound, not glass breaking, but glass weeping. Tiny fractures spider-webbed across the sealed lead, and through them more saline poured, thicker now, viscous, carrying with it the faint scent of mother's milk gone sour. The drowned uniforms began to move, not drifting, marching. Invisible feet in perfect unison, left, right, left, right. The water rippling in precise V-shaped wakes, they formed ranks facing the altar, which Luca now saw for the first time. The altar was bare except for a single silver chalice overturned, its rim crusted with dried salt. Behind it, the fresco of the crucifixion had been defaced, the face of Christ scraped away, leaving only a raw oval of plaster that wept steadily, steadily, steadily. The child-sized company came to attention. Then, as one, they saluted, tiny arms rising in perfect Swiss Guard precision, palms forward, fingers extended and joined. The motion sent a wave across the chapel. The saline rose to Luca's knees, warm as amniotic fluid. He looked down. His reflection in the water was not his own. It was the boy he had been in 1989, gap-toothed, freckled, eyes wide with the terror of having seen something behind the tabernacle that no child should see. The boy's mouth moved. The words bubbled up through the tears. "You left us here to guard the door. You promised you would come back when you were big enough to open it again. You are big enough now." The ledger in Luca's arms opened by itself, pages fluttering like dying birds. On the blank vellum opposite his name, fresh ink bloomed, read Parvulos meos, "Give me back my little ones." The uniforms began to sink. One by one they folded in on themselves, fabric collapsing inward as though small rib cages beneath were exhaling for the last time. They sank until only the Morian helmets remained afloat, empty, turning slowly like boats with no passengers. The saline rose to Luca's waist. It was hotter now, almost scalding, and thick with something that clung to his skin like albumin. He tried to step back and found he could not. The water had become adhesive, gentle but absolute, the way a mother's arms hold a child who must not be allowed to run into traffic. From the scraped face of Christ on the wall came a voice, not loud, but intimate, as though spoken directly into the cup of his ear. 33 minutes, Luca. That is how long you borrowed from them. Tonight you will return it with interest. The rose window shattered inward, not in shards, in tears. A solid sheet of saline poured down, roaring softly, the sound of 1,000,000 people crying at once. It struck the floor, and the flood rose to his chest, his shoulders, his throat. Luca clutched the ledger above his head, like a drowning man with a plank. The last thing he saw before the water closed over his eyes was his childhood uniform rising to the surface, empty sleeves spread wide as if to embrace him. Then the chapel lights, which had never been switched on, went out, and in the absolute dark beneath the tears, small hands found his ankles and began, very gently, to pull him home. Chapter 5. The Ossuary Elevator. The tears did not drown him, they simply carried him, the way a river carries a corpse that has forgotten how to struggle. Luca felt himself lifted, cradled, turned upright by a current that knew exactly where it wanted him. The ledger was gone from his hands. He could feel its absence like a missing lung. The darkness was total, warm, salted, and humming with the faint vibration of distant bells tolling underwater. Then the pressure changed. The saline thinned into ordinary air, cold and metallic. He was standing. His boots rested on iron grating that rang softly under his weight, the hollow note of a crypt bell. He opened his eyes. He was inside a freight elevator, no wider than a confessional. Its walls formed entirely of infant rib cages, thousands of them, bleached white and wired together with silver rosary chains. The bones were small enough that each cage had once belonged to a child, no older than 3. They clicked softly as the lift swayed. A wind chime made of the dead. A single bulb dangled from the ceiling on a frayed cord, swaying in time with the bones. Its light was the color of old jaundice. Above the door, an analog clock with a cracked face read, "Oh, 03 scores exactly." The second hand was frozen, but Luca could feel the minutes accumulating in his marrow like frost. There were no buttons, only a brass plaque engraved with a single line in Latin, "Descendit ad inferos, non omnis qui descendit, reversus est." He descends to hell. Not everyone who descends returns. The doors. 2 sliding grills of wrought iron, shaped like crossed keys, closed by themselves with a sound like teeth meeting. The lift dropped. Not fast. A slow, deliberate descent, the kind that lets you count heartbeats between floors. The rib cages clicked in perfect rhythm, a lullaby of small bones. First floor. The grill opened onto a corridor lit by torches that burned with black flame. The walls were lined with reliquaries containing the tongues of saints who had spoken against the church. Each tongue was still moving, slowly, endlessly forming the same silent word. Luca could not read lips, but he felt the shape of it in his mouth. Traditor, traitor. The doors closed before he could step out. Second floor. A scriptorium where monks in various stages of decomposition copied forbidden gospels onto parchment made from human skin. Their quills were finger bones dipped in gall. One monk looked up as the lift passed. His eyes had been sewn shut with gold thread, but he smiled with perfect recognition and lifted a page still wet with ink. It bore Luca's childhood handwriting, the act of contrition he had memorized at age 7. Third floor, a library of mirrors. Each mirror showed a different pope confessing a different mortal sin. Pius XV wept blood as he admitted signing concordats with monsters. John Paul I, dead after 33 days, confessed that he had been murdered and had allowed it because he was tired. The mirrors rippled like water, and in every one Luca saw his own reflection standing behind the Pope, holding the pillow, the poison, the knife. He pressed himself to the back wall. The rib cages pressed against his spine, warm now, almost affectionate. Fourth floor. The lift did not stop, but the doors opened anyway. Beyond lay a vast ossuary chamber where the bones of unbaptized infants were arranged into perfect scale models of St. Peter's Basilica. The dome was made of tiny skulls no larger than walnuts. In the center, on an altar of femurs, stood a single red Swiss Guard jacket, child-sized, waiting. The clock above the door clicked to 03:11, fifth floor. Here the air was thick with incense and the smell of burning hair. Rows of iron maidens stood open, each containing the desiccated body of a Swiss guard who had broken his oath of celibacy. Their faces were serene, almost ecstatic. One still clutched a lock of dark hair tied with a faded blue ribbon. Luca recognized the ribbon. It had belonged to his mother, sixth floor. The lift shuddered and slowed. The doors opened onto darkness absolute, but Luca could hear breathing, vast, tidal, the respiration of something that had learned to inhale centuries, a voice, not sound but pressure inside his skull, spoke in the dialect of his childhood. Quanti anni hai, Luca? How old are you? Luca? He answered before he could stop himself. 34? The voice laughed, the sound of graveyard earth shifting. No, tu hai 33 minuti, sempre 33 minuti. The doors closed. The lift dropped again, faster now, the rib cages clattering like hail on a tin roof. The clock read 03:29, 1 minute left. The descent became freefall, the kind that happens in dreams when you realize you are already dead. Then it stopped, not gently. The impact drove Luca to his knees. The rib cages sang a high, crystalline note that resolved into a single word, repeated over and over. Amen, amen, amen. The doors opened. He was at the bottom. The chamber beyond was perfectly circular, hewn from black basalt veined with gold. In the center stood a mirror taller than a man, framed in bones that had once belonged to popes, finger bones, tooth bones, the delicate bones of inner ears. The mirror was not glass, it was water, still, dark, held upright by will alone. Luca rose. He did not want to look, but the mirror wanted him to. His reflection was already waiting. It showed St. Peter's Square at dawn tomorrow, 19th of November, 2025. The obelisk stood in the center as always, but now a body hung crucified upon it. Arms outstretched along the granite arms, feet crossed and pierced by a single iron spike. The body was his, naked except for the remnants of a Swiss Guard uniform, shredded by whips and birds. The face was turned toward the rising sun, eyes burned away, mouth open in a scream that would never be heard because the square was full of tourists taking selfies, laughing, oblivious. Their phones showed the date clearly, 19/11 and 2025, time 6:47. One woman in a red coat zoomed in on the corpse's face and captioned her photo. Cool Vatican street art, Czar when in Rome, behind the crucified Luca. The papal balcony was empty. The curtains moved as though someone had just stepped back inside, in the mirror. The living Luca watched his dead self twitch once, the last neural fire of a brain that had taken too long to realize it was finished. The clock above the mirror read 3:33 exactly. The second hand began to move forward for the first time all night. The reflection smiled with Luca's own mouth, teeth stained red. It spoke without moving its lips. The voice coming from inside Luca's chest. 33 minutes. Luca, you borrowed them in 1989. The interest is due at sunrise. The mirror rippled. A hand reached out of the water. His own hand, scarred, bleeding, and seized him by the throat. It pulled. Luca felt himself lifted, weightless, drawn toward the surface that was not a surface. The last thing he saw before the dark water closed over his face was the date on the tourists' phones changing, one by one, to tomorrow. Then the elevator doors shut with the soft finality of a tomb, and the rib cages began to sing the Salve Regina in voices too small and too old to be human. Chapter 6, The confession that kills. The elevator did not rise. It simply opened again on the same floor it had left. Yet everything had changed. The rib cages were silent now, hanging limp like wind chimes after the storm has passed. The bulb overhead had burned out, leaving only the faint afterglow of bone. Luca stepped out into a corridor he did not remember entering, narrow, carpeted in deep crimson that drank the light. His legs moved without permission. Invisible hands, as many of them, small, patient, guided him by the elbows and the nape of the neck. He felt the pressure of fingerprints that had never belonged to living children, 20 paces ahead. A confessional booth stood alone in the center of the passage, an anachronism carved from black walnut and one-way mirror glass. It had no crucifix, no purple stole, no kneeler, only two compartments separated by a lattice of polished steel that reflected everything and revealed nothing. The door to the penitent's side stood open. Luca was steered inside. The door closed behind him with the soft click of a camera shutter. The space was barely large enough for a man to kneel. The air was thick with the scent of melted wax and fear sweat. The mirror walls showed him from every angle at once. A man in his 30s, with gray already threading his temples, eyes ringed black, mouth set in the rictus of someone who has understood too late. Across the lattice, the priest's compartment was dark. Then it was not. A figure sat there, backlit by a single red lamp that turned the mirror blood bright. The uniform was unmistakable, the gala dress of a captain of the Pontifical Swiss Guard. White tunic with gold braid, crimson sash, black trousers with the scarlet stripe. The rank Luca had been 4 months away from when they carried him out screaming. The face was his own, aged 15 years. The scar on the throat had widened into a livid trench. The eyes were calm, almost tender. Older Luca leaned forward until his forehead touched the lattice. His breath fogged the steel. "Bless me, brother," he said in Luca's own voice, only deeper, smoke-cured, patient. "For I have sinned, and you are about to—" The words struck Luca like a slap. The older man's hands, gloved in white leather, stained rust brown, folded in prayer. The gloves were torn at the knuckles. "My last confession was never," he continued. "Tonight, I will remedy that." He began, not with childhood sins, not with the small thefts and lies of youth. He began with tonight. "In 7 minutes," the older Luca said, "I will meet Monsignor Gregorio in the Sala Regia. He will beg me to stop what has already begun. I will place my ceremonial sash around his neck from behind, the one embroidered with the keys of Peter, and I will pull until the cartilage parts like wet paper. He will make a sound like a dove with a broken wing. I will feel his pulse flutter against the silk. Slow, slow, stop. Then I will arrange his body so that it looks like suicide by despair." Luca lunged at the lattice. His fists struck mirror. The impact reverberated through bone, but the glass did not crack. The older man did not flinch. "In 12 minutes," he continued calmly, "I will descend to the necropolis and open the iron gate that has not been touched since 1958. 47 children will follow me upward, barefoot, silent. They will carry candles made from the fat of unbaptized infants. Their flames will not flicker," Luca screamed. The sound came out as a whisper. In 29 minutes, I will stand on the balcony of St. Peter's and announce to the world that the church has a new guardian. The crowds will cheer because they will not yet understand what they are cheering for. By then, you will already be nailed to the obelisk, payment for the 33 minutes you stole in 1989. He leaned closer. The lattice was cold as a morgue drawer. And in 41 minutes, he whispered, you will watch yourself do all of this from inside my skin, because I am what remains when the debt is paid. Luca clawed at the door, locked. The older man lifted his right hand. On the palm, carved deep and still bleeding, was the date, 19th of November, 2025, Ora Substura 3:41, exactly as 7 minutes from now. Ego te absolvo, the older Luca said, making the sign of the cross with deliberate slowness. But only if you finish what we started. The red lamp went out. The compartment was empty. Luca was alone with 6 reflections of himself, screaming silently in mirror glass. Then the door opened. He stumbled out into the corridor. The carpet drank his footsteps. 20 meters ahead, at the junction with the Sala Regia, Monsignor Gregorio waited beneath a fresco of the Battle of Lepanto, hands clasped, face pale with the knowledge of what was coming. He looked up as Luca approached. Luca, he began, voice trembling. Thank God you're... The ceremonial sash, crimson silk heavy with gold thread, was already in Luca's hands. He did not remember taking it from the confessional wall. Gregorio's eyes widened. The sash looped around the old priest's neck with the ease of long practice. Luca felt the silk tighten, felt the small bones shift and pop like bubble wrap under gift wrapping. Gregorio's mouth opened. The sound that came out was exactly as promised. A dove with a broken wing. 7 minutes later. The body knelt neatly against the wall, head bowed in final prayer, tongue protruding purple, eyes rolled white. Luca stood over it, hands steady, breathing even. He looked at his watch. 03:41 exactly. In the polished marble floor, he caught his reflection. The uniform was no longer the plain black he had worn when he entered the Vatican tonight. It was the gala white of a captain. The scar on his throat had widened, and in his eyes burned the calm, patient tenderness of a man who had just confessed, been absolved, and was now ready to begin the next part of the penance. Somewhere behind the walls, small barefoot feet began to ascend the stairs, carrying candles that did not flicker. Luca, the new Luca, the only Luca that would matter from this night, turned and walked toward the necropolis gate. The debt had been acknowledged. It was almost time to pay it in full. Chapter 7, the 13th Bed. The stairs that should not exist began directly behind the tapestry of the resurrection in the Sala Regia. Luca lifted the heavy Flemish weave with the same hand that had, minutes ago, arranged Monsignor Gregorio's corpse into a posture of prayer. The fabric parted like skin. Behind it was no wall, only a narrow staircase of black marble veined with gold, spiraling upward into a darkness that smelled of lilies left too long in holy water. He climbed. Each step was exactly the height of a child's shin, 47 steps. He counted because counting was the last remnant of the man who had once believed in sequence, in cause and effect, in the possibility of return. At the top was a door of plain olive wood, no lock, no handle, only a small brass plate engraved with the papal tiara and the letters Ses P.A. Stanza Private Apostolici, the floor that appears on no blueprint, the floor where popes go when they need to die alone. The door opened inward at his approach. The room beyond was vast and intimate at once, lit by 13 beeswax candles floating in midair, flames upright and unmoving. The air was perfectly still, the temperature of a confessional in winter. The scent was frankincense, myrrh, and the faint sweetness of embalming fluid that has never quite dried. In the center of the room stood 13 beds, antique, ecclesiastical, terrible, each one different, yet identical in purpose. The first, a simple iron cot with blood-rusted restraints, Clement Vive, poisoned at Avignon. The second, a gilded Renaissance four-poster, sheets still stained with the black vomit of arsenic, Alexander VI's The Borgia Pope. The third, narrow, monastic, the mattress indented by a body that had lain rigid for weeks, John Paul I or 33 days, smile fixed in rictus, and so on, in chronological order of violent or mysterious death, up to the 12th, a modern hospital bed with leather straps and cardiac leads that still twitched faintly, as though waiting for a heart that had stopped too suddenly. The 13th bed stood apart, at the foot of a crucifix carved from a single piece of darkened ivory. It was new. The wood was pale oak, freshly planed, the sheets Egyptian cotton, so white they hurt to look at. The pillows were plumped, the counterpane turned down in perfect hospital corners. Embroidered on the top sheet in crimson silk were the initials LLM, Luca Moretti. The candles drifted closer, forming a perfect circle around the bed. He felt the invitation more than heard it. His feet moved. He did not lie down. He was laid down. Invisible hands, small, patient. The hands of altar boys who had never been allowed to grow lifted him, arranged him, straightened his limbs with the tenderness of undertakers who have all the time in the world. Soft leather cuffs closed around his wrists and ankles, not tight, just enough to remind him that choice had ended somewhere between the sash and the staircase. He lay on his back, staring up at the canopy embroidered with the keys of Peter, upside down. The candles lowered until their flames were level with his eyes. One by one, the beds around him began to fill. The corpses rose from where they had been waiting, some in state robes, some in simple white nightshirts, and sat upright with the soft creak of old joints, lubricated by prayer. They watched him the way family watches a difficult birth. Last to move was the occupant of the third bed, John Paul I, Albino Luciani, swung his bare feet to the floor and stood. He had not aged a day since the morning they found him dead, with a smile and a copy of the Imitation of Christ open on his chest. His skin was wax smooth, his eyes the pale blue of a man who had seen something on the other side and decided to come back for the rest of the story. He walked to the 13th bed and leaned over Luca until their faces were inches apart. The Pope's breath smelled of peppermint and formalin. Luca tried to speak. No sound came. John Paul, I smiled the same gentle, heartbreaking smile that had unsettled cardinals for 33 days. You were never fired, Luca, he whispered in perfect Italian, the Venetian cadence soft as confession. You were promoted. His cold fingers traced the scar on Luca's throat, the one that had opened wider with every death tonight. 9 years ago, when they carried you out screaming. That was your ordination. The secret guard of the night needs only one man, eternal, replaceable only by himself. He gestured to the circle of papal corpses. Every time the ledger demands a new name, we call you back. You forget. You remember, you die. You are reborn as the next recruit. 47 times we have done this. Tonight makes 48. Luca's eyes burned with tears he could not shed. The Pope leaned closer. The children in the chapel, they were you, Luca, every altar boy who vanished for 33 minutes and came back silent. We kept them pure. We kept them ready. Now they keep you. He placed something in Luca's bound hand, a small brass key, warm from a child's pocket. The gate to the necropolis opens only from the inside now. When the sun rises and finds no shadows in the square, you will rise too, as captain, as guardian, as the man who finally pays the debt in full. The candles flared. The other popes began to sing softly, the Dies Irae, in a minor key that had never been written down. John Paul. I kissed Luca's forehead with lips cold as marble. Sleep, my son. Dawn is only 2 hours away, and you have a crucifixion to attend. The leather cuffs tightened, not cruelly, but with the finality of swaddling clothes. The 13th bed accepted its occupant completely, above him. The floating candles lowered one by one until their flames touched the sheets. They did not burn, they simply went out. In the darkness, 47 small hands tucked the blankets under his chin, smoothed his hair, and began the lullaby that had no words, only the soft clicking of infant rib cages remembering how to pray. Luca closed his eyes, and for the first time in 9 years, he slept. Chapter 8. Dawn Without Shadows. The sleep was not sleep. It was the absence of everything. Time, pain, memory, mercy. A black interval that lasted either 9 years or 9 seconds. Then the cuffs released. Luca's eyes opened to the same 13 candles floating above him. Only now their flames burned backward, sucking light into themselves instead of giving it out. The papal corpses were gone. The beds were empty, sheets still warm, indentations fading like breath on glass. He sat up. The room was tilting, slowly, the way a ship lists before it sinks. The olive wood door stood open onto a staircase, spiraling downward this time. He rose. His legs carried him without consultation, down, past the confessional of mirrors, now shattered into 1,000 reflections of the same man walking toward his own end, past the ossuary elevator, doors yawning wide, rib cages silent, and waiting for the next child who would never grow up, past the chapel of tears, where the saline had receded, leaving only hundreds of tiny footprints leading nowhere. The staircase ended at a side door onto the Cortile della Pina. He stepped out into what should have been dawn. The sky above Rome was the color of a bruise held too long against the light. No sun, no horizon glow, only a vast, lidless dark that pressed down on the city like the palm of a hand over a mouth. 06 exactly. The bells of St. Peter's should have begun the Angelus. They did not ring. They hung motionless in the towers, tongues frozen mid-swing. Luca walked. The Vatican was already full. Millions of pilgrims filled the square, shoulder to shoulder, faces upturned toward the papal balcony in perfect, expectant silence. They wore the bright colors of a Wednesday general audience: yellow hats, flags from every nation, children on shoulders, phones raised like offerings, but none of them cast shadows. The cobblestones beneath their feet were bare, unmarked, as though the light itself had been excommunicated. Luca pushed through the crowd, hands parted for him without resistance, bodies yielding like water. No one looked at him. Their eyes were fixed on the balcony where the curtains of the papal apartment had just begun to stir. He reached the foot of the obelisk. The granite was warm, pulsing faintly, the way living stone pulses when something ancient stirs beneath it. He looked up. On the balcony stood a man in the pristine white gala uniform of a captain of the Pontifical Swiss Guard. The morion helmet gleamed. The crimson plumes stirred, though there was no wind. The man raised one gloved hand and waved, slow, regal, utterly calm. It was Luca, the same scar, widened now into a perfect circle, like a second mouth. The same eyes, but ancient, patient, amused. The crowd erupted into cheers that made no sound. The captain on the balcony smiled the gentle, heartbreaking smile of John Paul I and began to speak. His words rolled out over the square in perfect Italian, Latin, English, every language at once. Yet Luca heard them only inside his skull. Dear brothers and sisters, today the Church welcomes a new guardian, one who has served in silence for centuries, one who understands the weight of 33 minutes. The pilgrims knelt as one, a wave of devotion rippling outward. Luca opened his mouth to scream. No sound emerged. He clawed at his throat. His fingers passed through flesh that felt increasingly like wax left too close to a candle. The body cam clipped to his chest, the one he had not worn when he entered the Vatican 9 hours earlier, flickered to life. Its red recording light blinked steadily. On the tiny screen, timestamp frozen at 05:59:59, his own voice, calm, resigned, almost tender, spoke the final entry. If you're watching this from anywhere in the world after sunrise, close the video now, because the man on the balcony isn't me anymore, and whatever is wearing my face is about to choose tonight's replacement. The captain on the balcony lowered his gaze and looked directly down at the obelisk, directly at Luca. Their eyes met across the void. The captain's lips moved. No sound, but Luca understood perfectly. Your shift is over. The obelisk shuddered. Granite split with a sound like continents divorcing. Iron spikes erupted from the stone, cold, precise, hungry. Luca felt his wrists and ankles that seized by the same small, patient hands that had tucked him in. He was lifted, spread, nailed, not with hammers. There was no need. The spikes simply passed through flesh and bone, as though his body had already agreed to the arrangement centuries ago. Pain bloomed, bright and brief, then receded into the warm, familiar absence he had mistaken for sleep. The crowd rose to its feet and applauded soundlessly. Phones flashed. A little girl in a yellow hat took a selfie with the new decoration on the obelisk and captioned it, "Amazing Vatican Sunrise. Chios blessed." The captain on the balcony saluted, crisp, perfect Swiss Guard precision, then turned and disappeared behind the curtains. The bruise-colored sky lightened by 1 degree. Not dawn, only the promise of dawn. Luca hung, weightless now, watching the millions disperse in perfect order, none of them casting shadows, none of them looking back. He tried to scream again. This time a sound did emerge, thin, childlike, the voice he had used at age 9 when he returned from behind the tabernacle, unable to speak for 3 days, from the papal window. The curtains parted once more. The captain stepped out carrying a telephone, an old rotary model, black, the kind used in the Vatican before digital lines. He held it to his ear, listened, nodded, then he looked down at the obelisk, at the thing that had once been Luca, and spoke into the receiver with infinite gentleness. Send the next one. Tell him the bronze doors remember. Far away, in a small apartment in Trastevere, a phone began to ring at exactly 02:13. The microwave clock, frozen for 9 years, blinked and advanced to 02:14. Somewhere in the city, a man woke from a dream of tears and uniforms and small hands pulling him home. He would answer on the 8th ring, and the ledger, warm as living skin, would add another name in handwriting that was already his own. The night shift never ends, only the guard changes. If you are reading this after sunrise, close the book because the balcony is empty again, and something is listening for the next set of footsteps crossing the threshold. Good night, or whatever is left of it.